Hello, everyone. This is Matthew Kabitas, formerly known as Cube the Noob, here on YouTube. And as you may have noticed, a few things have changed around here. And that's because Christian basically said that he's fed up with pretty much everything. So I kind of assumed control in a grab for power over just a YouTube channel. Really impressive, right? Anyway, welcome to the inaugural Cubic Dimensions pilot thing relaunch. And today we will be talking about a whole host of things, pretty much the same that we used to do on This Week Has 1 Hour, which, if you haven't seen, you should totally watch because we had a good run and we said some amusing things. And speaking of This Week Has 1 Hour and amusing things, I'm going to harken back to a previous This Week Has 1 Hour episode, the number of which escapes me, but for those of you who are loyal viewers, such as Blood and Wine Are Red, can go back and review each one to find out which one it is. But it was back when Christian and I were watching one of the Republican debates, the aftermath of that, and there was the analysis that Donald Trump was speaking at a, I believe, third grade reading level, and his fellow Republicans on the stage were also speaking usually above the parameter that he was, but but still fairly low. Like no one really reached past sixth grade. And we were and like the rest of the media, basically, and the rest of punditry, we made fun of that. We mocked it. We said it was funny, and that and that it's sad that these people have to choose to speak this way. Now, what I submit to you is that Donald Trump and indeed the other Republican candidates speaking at such a low level of intelligence isn't a bad thing necessarily, at least for them. And I say this because the one thing that I've really noticed with Donald Trump is the attraction he has to working class people and the attraction he has to lower income people. And that's because, and a lot of the people who support him, often their reason is, oh, he talks like me, or he says stuff that I believe in. And of course, when you approach them with the rather racist stuff that he said, they dismiss it and they say, no, that's not it. And they go on to describe other things such as his sort of, simple talk. And I think he hits the nail the nail on the head with that, because people are fed up with having these politicians that talk, granted eloquently, but with such big words that they don't understand. They want politicians who speak like them. And so his sort of simple rhetoric appeals to them. What do you think, Christian?
Well, I would say that's the least surprising thing I've ever heard.
Well, see, the reason why I bring it up is because, despite maybe you and I having the foresight to know that at the time of when I'm referring, as well as when we take into account all the other pundits that have been covering this, both us back then and them never seemed to really get it through their heads.
Maybe, but I was misinterpreting what they were getting at, but I always assumed it was more so a comment on the electorate than the candidate. Maybe except for Rick Perry. I honestly think Rick Perry might only be capable of talking at like a fourth grade reading level. But for like a Jeb Bush, definitely could talk more intelligently. But there was this Canadian candidate for the Liberal Party named Michael Ignatieff. And he was incredibly brilliant, this guy. Well, he's alive. I don't know if I'm saying was. He is still alive. So he's incredibly brilliant. But when he ran for prime minister, he could totally get cast as like this like cold kind of outsider who'd lived in the US too long and didn't understand Canadians. And it worked. The Conservatives demolished him. I think he had one of the biggest defeats the Liberals ever suffered. But if you're an educated person, you heard Ignatieff talk, or you listen to him now, you're like, wow, it is tragic this guy never got to be prime minister. This was a brilliant man. So, it's not even a uniquely American problem. I just think too many people say, "Oh, that man don't talk like me. He must be scary. I'm gonna vote for this man over here. He talks like me." Like it's as simple as that. Like I think most people, it's most people don't look at the issues. It's just, it gives me a good feeling, make me feel good, and that's all it is. And it's as I said, other than Rick Perry, I think most politicians do that in a lot of countries, not just the U.S.
Why'd you just turn into like a leprechaun?
I don't know.
No, but that's kind of exactly what I'm getting at, is that that's the sort of simple folk kind of talking way is what got a lot of people elected. Harry Truman is one of them, but I think it's becoming a bigger thing now. For instance, with that guy in the Philippines, was it?
Yeah.
Who is the mayor of whatever city, and he's labeled the Donald Trump of the Philippines, and he kind of got elected on that same sort of folksy, he talks like me campaign. And obviously that's not the only part of Donald Trump's campaign. Like he's winning over people in other respects as well. But I think it's something that really hurts him because, pundits, even with the polls that are coming out that show basically him and Hillary Clinton neck and neck, they keep dismissing him and saying, no, Hillary Clinton is obviously going to win. It's inevitable. President Clinton 2.0 is coming in. And yet this is staring them right in the face, because Hillary Clinton, what I think she does wrong is that she mocks Donald Trump for being stupid, or for sounding stupid, at least sounding ignorant. And that gets liberals riled up, and that gets people who are already anti-Trump riled up. That doesn't win over independents. That doesn't win over people who are considering Trump or who are undecided. It's just like, well, that's the equivalent. They see it as the equivalent of Trump, making racist comments, but it's for Hillary Clinton, and it just turns them off from her. So I think it's a political miscalculation on her part.
Yeah, it's something I know it's a complaint that I know Kyle on Secular Talk has had a complaint about the media doing this as well. It's the whole going at Trump for the political correctness thing, not realizing that probably 55% of the country likes him for that. And then when you attack him for that, they're like, but that's why we like him. You attacking him for doing the thing we like just makes us not like you, because you're against what we like.
Exactly. I mean, to some extent, not saying I'd vote for Donald Trump. To some extent, I like it too. I like his, sort of unabashed blatantness, because again, that goes along with the sort of rhetoric, the sort of the way he talks thing, is that people are tired of this pampered, fake, cookie cutter politician, which is what Hillary Clinton is. They want someone who talks like them, who is, who just acts like a common person. And coming along with that is political correctness. A lot of people aren't fans of political correctness, unfortunately. Yeah, I think, if you ask me, I think political correctness is a good thing. I think that you should, restrain yourself, and you shouldn't be, you should know that there are certain words you can't say. Granted, I think it's kind of gotten out of control, and I think that's how most people view it. Like you said, most people view it as having gotten out of control.
Yeah. Would I agree that it has? I don't know. I think you're overestimating how big of how much of the culture is represented by like university campuses, if you say that.
I don't mean I mean in the sense of the media, because to me the media really represents the whole political correctness movement because of the guidelines they have to follow, because of the oh, you can't say X word next word, all these words on TV, and for instance, Lewis Black. Let's take Lewis Black, right? Which I wish I had done this a few weeks earlier so we could have covered the White House Correspondents' Dinner, because I don't find Lewis Black that funny personally. It's just like the subjects that he jokes about. He's a mini Jon Stewart, and so I'm down with that. But just his delivery and the jokes
You're
he makes.
not thinking of
Hmm?
Lewis Black.
He was okay. But the point is that he was at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, and he got under some people's nerves because he said, one of the things he said was, "Oh, there's a bunch of wonderful reporters here, and then Don Lemon is also here." And then he also used the N-word at one point. And for once, I thought he actually did a good job. But the media went absolutely ballistic over this, and we're like, oh, you can't do that. That's wrong. And CNN, I think, is what Don Lemon's from. Don Lemon actually wanted Lewis Black on a week later, because they had made up. They had a call. They called each other. They made up, and Don Lemon wanted Lewis Black on his show, and CNN said no, and now Lewis Black is on their blacklist.
So you're thinking of Larry Wilmore. That's why I was so confused.
Oh my god, I'm dumb. Larry Wilmore. I love Lewis Black. I'm sorry. Lewis Black is hilarious.
I'm like, Lewis Black has a show and I'm not aware of this?
I had graduation. I just got home from work. Son of a. Okay.
I think that's to get to what you were saying though, ignoring that. I don't know if the media is politically correct. I think the media is just. I don't know if I'd call that political correctness because I think it's I think it's a different thing going on. Because I think they're looking for an excuse to bash this dissident voice on the media landscape. They don't really actually care. Don Lemon has said the N-word on his show before. He's had segments that were very, very uncomfortable discussing that. But Don Lemon's okay because Don Lemon knows the rules and he follows the rules. He's nice to the right people, but Larry Wilmore isn't like that. So once you have the chance to bash Larry Wilmore, once he gives you any little slip up, then you got to bash Larry Wilmore because he's not following the rules.
Well, so I know what you're saying, and I agree to a certain extent. Okay, but let's take the N-word incident aside, right? Let's just talk about him bashing Don Lemon, and then him, he also made a few off-color remarks about other media companies, right? That were present. I think yes, it is partially them wanting to bash a dissident voice and say because when Stephen Colbert did it, I think it was against President Bush, and I think it was during the 2006 White House Correspondents' Dinner. So at that time, President Bush was not very popular. It was basically seen as like, oh, of course he's going to make fun of him. Of course he's going to roast him. Like that's what anybody else would do. And of course, it's against President Bush because he's a bad president. But then it comes to he just came when it came to Larry Wilmore, not Lewis Black. It came to him here. They're all just trying to have a good time. They're all trying to be like, haha, oh, we're great, we've got a great really. He just comes in guns a-blazing. So yeah, I think part of that is they wanted to push away a dissident voice, but that's just one example. I can't think of many off the top of my head, but you can go back and look at multiple instances of someone just saying something off, but that's a swear or something like that, or using the wrong terminology, and the media going, oh, whoa, 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 you can't do that, you can't do that. And I think that's because they want to have this sort of, for lack of a better term, politically correct uh, barrier in their on their shows, because they want to reel in as many people as possible, and they want to appeal to as many people. Same reason why big companies are now have turned en masse in favor of gay marriage, because they realize if we turn away gay people, we're turning away customers. So why don't we accept gay people? Because we're accepting more customers, we're getting more money.
Okay. I don't know. I don't view it that way, but I see where you're coming from. But I think the kind of political correctness you see in the corporate world is different and healthier than the political correctness. Like I think we're using this word to cover too many concepts. Is what I'm playing at.
Oh no, I agree, and I'm just using it because I can't think of a better word. I don't think it's really political correctness, but what my point being is that the Trump voters view it as political correctness.
Okay, that's a good point. Yeah,
and they view it as freedom of speech subjugation and First Amendment subjugation. So that's so while it may be misguided, that's how they view it. That's how they understand it, and that's why they like Trump so much, because he doesn't have that sort of cookie cutter sort of let me choose every word that I say carefully sort of attitude or way about himself. He just kind of goes off and does his thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Nothing else.
All right. So,
Nothing else to add to that.
All right. Now, I'm not just mentioning this because my co-host is also, or I'd say, also black, but Muhammad Ali, unfortunately, passed away, I believe it was 2 nights ago. Unfortunately, I had to wake up to that news from the morning of my graduation, which was not something that I was particularly happy about, because I am a bit of a fan of Muhammad Ali. But so obviously, when a big celebrity dies, there is a bunch of stuff that comes out about them afterwards. There's a bunch of conspiracy theories about how they died, about how, oh no, he didn't die of a heart attack. He actually got stabbed in the abdomen or something like that. And or no, Donald Trump actually assassinated him himself, or something stupid like that. But I really want to talk. I really kind of want to get past that and talk about the legacy of Muhammad Ali, because of course people think of him as Muhammad Ali the boxer, which for the most part, that's who he was, because that was his profession. But I'd like to talk about more the the other things that Muhammad Ali did, as in other respects. Do you have anything of note that you'd like to bring up?
It's actually funny because we actually briefly mentioned Piers Morgan here, but what I had thought was someone brought up a really funny quote. It was 2 Donald Trump tweets, and the first Trump tweet was, Obama said some of our heroes are Muslim. Who the heck is he talking about? And then the next tweet is, oh, it's so tragic to see Muhammad Ali die. He was a hero to us all. Then you're like, What?
Okay, for the record, in case those viewing don't know, Muhammad Ali, yes, he was Muslim. He was a Muslim American, but he was not born Muhammad Ali. He was born Cassius Clay Jr. And he changed his name to Muhammad Ali after he converted to Islam as a young man, which I forget when exactly. I'm looking at his Wikipedia page right now. All right. Well, it's kind of irrelevant when he converted to
1962.
okay,
I think.
1960. Thank you. But yeah, that's so. And only 4 years later, in 1964, he won. At only 22, he won the World Heavyweight Championship. In boxing. So now, the reason why I bring it up is not only because Muhammad Ali was a great boxer, as I said earlier, but also because he is a significant figure in terms of social movements in the United States. Obviously, I mentioned, we just mentioned, he won the heavyweight championship in 1964. He converted to Islam in 1960. So he was around in the 60s. He was growing up in the 60s, and as an African American person, that's very important because of the civil rights movement, and Muhammad Ali being a significant African American at the time didn't just kind of fall by the wayside and just let MLK and Stokely Carmichael have all the fun. He himself had his own push into social movements in the United States. He was very active, obviously, in civil rights as well as opposition to the Vietnam War.
He was a member of the Nation of Islam, man.
Yeah, and that's something. That's also something important to mention is that people such as Malcolm X, who at one point headed the Nation of Islam, get this bad rap of being violent, of promoting violence, and of course they did. But at the same time, kind of like on the lines of that Donald Trump tweet that you mentioned, there are a lot of significant African Americans and Muslim Americans who we praise and love and laud, who were part of the Nation of Islam, and yet we kind of forget that, and Muhammad Ali is one of them.
Yeah, it's it actually gets something I did want to bring up, if you don't mind.
No, go right ahead.
It's interesting because when you see him covered, for the most part, I've noticed it's very much focused on his boxing career, and I find that kind of frustrating. If it's great if you go literally to the History Channel's page on Muhammad Ali, there is no mention of him doing anything outside of boxing.
It's kind of like it's kind of like making something about Cesar Chavez and just talking about how he was a worker and not how he contributed to the workers, to the labor movement. Or it's kind of like talking about MLK and just talking about how he contributed to civil rights and how he didn't, and not how he contributed to the war in Vietnam and to politics. Oh wait, we never talk about that either, do we?
Exactly.
We just talk about his civil rights shit. That's right.
Yeah.
That's...
He was opposed to the Vietnam War. He did missions to Cuba and China while he was in the 60s. Like, he went to those countries, did aid missions and that kind of stuff. He's yeah.
I want to say. I want to say he. Now, don't quote me on this because I might be wrong. I want to say he was at one point a professed socialist.
Maybe. I wouldn't surprise me at all.
Which is funny because, of course, Republicans like to claim him as their territory. Even though I believe he might, yeah, I think he was registered as a Republican as a young man, but when it came to the 50s and when it's the Republican Party started to shift towards the South, become more segregationist, he became a Democrat. Because I know, I want to pull it up if I can find it, because there is a quote from him that said he never publicly endorsed any presidential candidate, but at any point in time. But during the 1960 election, he felt compelled to do so in favor of then Senator John F. Kennedy.
Hmm.
Let's find it. Do-do-do-do-do.
Loading music.
Okay, no one wants to hear that again.
No.
Here,
But man, his quote about the Vietnam War was intense.
Yeah, I don't know. I encourage everybody to watch his final speech, which was actually on Vietnam. It's it's a very good speech. My history teacher had us had us listen to it towards the end of the year this year, and I really liked it because it like we're saying, it showed that he wasn't just he wasn't just someone who was in favor of civil rights. He also wanted to talk about labor rights and about Vietnam. Oh, okay, but here is it. Although King never publicly supported a political party or candidate for president, in a letter to a civil rights supporter in October 1956, he said that he was undecided as to whether he'd vote for Adlai Stevenson or Dwight Eisenhower. But in the past, I've always voted for the Democratic ticket. In his autobiography, King states that in 1960, he privately voted for Democratic candidate JFK. I felt Kennedy would make the best president. I never came out with an endorsement. My father did, but I never made one. King adds that he likely would have made an exception to his non-endorsement policy for a second Kennedy term, saying, had President Kennedy lived, I would have probably endorsed him in 1964. And at no point did he endorse LBJ, but in 1964 he did encourage people to vote against Barry Goldwater, which in this two-party system was essentially saying vote for LBJ.
There you go.
So no, at no point was he a Republican.
Well, that's inconvenient, Matt.
You know what else is inconvenient? That Muhammad Ali was Muslim. How do people I want to know how people that just goes over people's heads. His name was Mohammed. He changed his name to Muhammad. You know who the prophet, the chief prophet of Islam is? Muhammad. Oh, I'm sorry. That's speaking above a 4th grade reading level.
That's true. That's true. You got to say the prophet of the scary brown people's religion, then they'll understand.
Well, no. You don't understand. See, they're actually all only half-ish, or like 3/4 white, 1/4 black, and it's just that the black is dominant. So, because only white people can get no. Okay, that's straw man. Yeah. But so, Christian, you alluded to this earlier, so let's get to talking about this. Piers Morgan I literally just noticed this right before we started, and I just think it's so ridiculous that I have to bring it up. So Piers Morgan tweeted, Muhammad Ali said far more inflammatory / racist things about white people than Donald Trump has ever about Muslims. Oh boy. All right.
People don't get so much, it's frustrating. Like, people like to remove context and then compare things out of their context and say, see, things are even. Hence, like, what? I've that's that's what he's doing. He's like, I don't even know what he's specifically referring to, but I'll trust he's referring to some specific thing he found was mean about white people. Although I don't know what
but
it
it's
is.
like, so what he's doing here is kind of the reverse of what a lot of white people do when talking about MLK, because they talk about all the nonviolent stuff he said, which, yes, he was primarily for nonviolence. But there are also plenty of quotes that you can find where MLK does talk about using violent action in a positive way, mainly rioting and stuff like that, and self-defense and things like that. It's kind of like that, but the reverse, or just talking about Malcolm X, about all the stuff that he said, about violent, the violent revolution against the white people. Like, okay, if Malcolm X really believed that, he would not have been as prominent as he was. No one is that stupid to think that 18 how many what percentage of black people are there in the United States? Like 18%, something like that? 8%? I can't remember. No one's that stupid to think that few people can overthrow like 70 plus whatever percent of the country. Everybody knows that that can't happen, including Malcolm X. So, like you said, it's taking things out of context. It's like, okay, here's a clear example. It's like when people say, oh, well, if a black person makes the same as a white person, or a male person and makes the same as a woman, oh, then it's equal. It's equal. It's all equal. That's it. They have the same life. They have the same opportunity. No, that is totally not taking into account the context. It's not taking into account all the other things that happen.
Yeah, and I think the reason is you're trying to control what these people's legacies are, in a sense, and the legacy that the legacy they would want to have is probably not always convenient, right? And I think quite effectively what we've done with Martin Luther King is we've reduced the scope, we've reduced him down to such a small part of what he was that you make him far less effective as a historical figure than he might have been otherwise in inspiring modern social movements.
Exactly.
And it's the same thing with Malcolm X. It's funny because if you want to talk about what they were actually getting at with using protests and riots to help create political pressure to achieve an objective, if you even talk about that, a lot of people write you off as racist or crazy, but you're like, but no, this is true. This is, like, they talked about this, but yeah, it's quite frustrating, and then that's completely removed from their history, and then most people don't even come to learn that.
You don't understand, Christian. You don't understand. Malcolm X was a thug. That's why we can't trust him.
And I love when, like, there's a riot, and then Fox is like, "Oh, Martin Luther King would have never wanted this," and you're like, I don't know.
I can't tell if I'm having a headache because you just mentioned that, or having a headache from the caffeine. I can't remember.
Yeah.
But and to some extent, that happens with white historical figures too. It's not just black. I don't mean to make a false equivalency, because I think it's more important when it comes to black individuals, because obviously Black people tend to be more painted with the same brush than white people, at least in this country. But to some extent, it happens the same way. Abraham Lincoln, for instance, he is constantly voted the best or the second best, second only to FDR, president of the United States. Right? People laud him. People, he brought the country together. And don't get me wrong, I love Abraham Lincoln. He's one of my favorite presidents too. Right? But the other thing you have to take into consideration is that he wasn't an angel. He violated habeas corpus. He installed unconstitutionally and illegally martial law into the state of Missouri, as well as a few other border states during the war. The Emancipation Proclamation was, for all intents and purposes, legally convoluted, unconstitutional, and had it been actually deliberated by courts and taken into consideration, it would have been ripped to shreds. But yet we view him, but yet no one ever talks about that. The only time I've ever really seen that brought up is in the movie Lincoln, and even at that, it's only like a passing thing. It doesn't really, it's not really that important. Other than that, it's the drive for getting the 13th Amendment passed. But that's besides the point. And yet, we just view him as this godlike figure. Like, no, he wasn't a monolith.
Yeah. Well, here's a question then. Let's get into that. It's the whole it's the whole the law is moral kind of conversation. Like Franklin Delano Roosevelt, also considered one of the best presidents. He did a lot of kind of sketchy legal stuff, but I think the way the U.S. system is that it's designed to make even the most popular and best-intentioned leader have a hard time getting anything significant done in 8 years. Which is, designed so that the alternative, a horrible person who's got the worst of intent, can't do a lot of damage in 8 years. But I think what you end up happening is some of the best regarded presidents are the presidents who had good intentions and were smart enough to manipulate that system. I don't know if that makes them bad. Maybe it's because I'm Canadian and I kind of, we Canadians are a little bit more comfortable with the concept of electing a dictator almost effectively, but.
Well, no, I'm not saying that, he was necessarily bad for doing that. I'm just saying that, in the face of common law, in the face of U.S. law, what he did was, legally speaking, wrong. Same thing, like you said, with FDR. He tried to stack the Supreme Court, so the Supreme Court, so it would have 14 instead of 9 justices and would approve all of his New Deal policies. Now, don't get me wrong, I love the New Deal policies, and that was kind of a smart move to try to do that. That was, an interesting political move. But legally speaking, it wasn't right.
So I'm just all I'm getting at is, should that affect their legacy then significantly? If you agree with the intent and you don't mind the action taken to achieve that intent, does it make it bad if the action was legally wrong? I'm just questioning that.
I think so, because it does have the potential to come back again when someone with not good intentions uses a similar route. Just a possibility. I'm not saying it should not necessarily taint their legacy, or that we shouldn't view Abraham Lincoln and FDR with the esteem that we do. But like when it comes with MLK and Malcolm X, we need to be viewing them as who they were as a whole, because they weren't perfect or they weren't all bad. They were humans. For instance, let's take. This
sounds like history. This is boring. I don't like history.
But okay, let's just finish this up real quick. Let's take it back to MLK, right? Before he died, there was a thing where the FBI tried to dig up dirt on him and saying, he had a mistress, and they had audio recordings of it and everything. And yeah, that's kind of hypocritical, because he was because he was a minister and he did preach, moral righteousness. But does that necessarily mean that he was a bad person now, or that he wasn't a good person? No. It just shows that he's human. And all of these people are human. They have their upsides and their downsides. We can't just say, we can't just look at one point in their life or one part of their life, one aspect of what they did, and say, oh, that's them, and they were a great person for it, or they were a horrible person for it.
All right.
All right, so now Christian brought up another story that he wanted to talk about in regards to Hillary Clinton. I believe he said Foreign Policy posted it. Interesting story. But just by the title, I can tell you I can already agree with it. But I'd like you to elaborate on it, if you could, please.
So basically, the article is kind of getting at how Hillary Clinton's foreign policy views, and it's something I think a lot of people are starting to talk about more recently, is how her foreign policy views are kind of horrible. With her hanging out with Kissinger and like saying Kissinger was such a inspiration to her, and then you're like, oh, that's actually not good. That's actually really bad. So they were kind of getting at that, and it was saying how she keeps touting her experience, but then you look at where she came from, her political heroes, the people who've influenced her, and then you realize this is like the meeting point of a whole bunch of bad historical figures in U.S. history tied to some of America's biggest foreign policy mistakes, and how she could seriously, the article really focuses on U.S.-China relations, for example, and it says how she wants to she's sort of been one of the big architects of the U.S.'s shift to the east. So that's basically redirecting military and strategic resources out of the Middle East into areas like Vietnam and the Philippines. And they were saying she's been a big architect of that, the whole projecting U.S. strength in the Pacific, and it's done the opposite of what the U.S. has wanted. What's happened basically is China sort of viewed this as a challenge, as a chance to show themselves as a modern military power. And because of this shift to the east, China is now focused on getting aircraft carriers. You might know of China building up islands in the South China Sea to put up air bases and radar stations.
China. We have aircraft carriers. We have the best aircraft carriers. We have the best islands. China, they have better islands.
And they were saying it's really damaged all the work that her husband actually did to try and build a good relationship with China. This whole shift to the east has really undermined the U.S.'s influence in the region. When really the U.S.'s real strength is that, as much as people like to say, oh, China, they're messing with, they have control over our economy, the U.S. has a lot of influence on China's economy, because the U.S. is the place, China's the engine, but the U.S. is the car, so to speak. And it has to, and the article sort of saying the U.S. has to look more to taking advantage of that, like they have historically, and that was sort of, if you want to give Nixon any kudos, that was one of the things he did.
And it's kind of surprising, honestly, and especially since you bring that up, because of course there's the old saying, only Nixon could go to China. Well, Hillary Clinton, while she was Secretary of State and now, has been infamously aggressive and hawkish in terms of foreign policy, as her husband kind of sort of was, I think to a lesser extent, when he was president. And so you'd think that, being a Nixon-esque figure, especially, not to mention with the scandals that she has to deal with, you'd think that she would play, the sort of tough guy sort of role that Nixon did, and then sit down with Jiang Zemin, or sit down with whoever the president, I think it's Jiang Zemin, sit down whoever is that you're looking up now.
Yeah, of course. That's what I would immediately do. It is Lee. I don't know.
Okay, let me see, because
Premier. It's Lee Keck. I can't pronounce that
the
last name. That's a
president of
problem.
China, not the premier.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Here, oh, sorry, Jiang Zemin is an older one. I keep getting it mixed up. It's Xi Jinping.
Oh yeah,
That's
Xi Jinping.
Xi Jinping.
Yeah.
So sit down with Xi Jinping, and and then be able to hammer out some sort of agreement like Nixon did with Mao. But as you said, she didn't do that. She's just kind of like, China, and it does hurt U.S. influence in the region, and especially, and it's really funny because especially Taiwan is really the focal point of Eastern relations. Besides say Japan and Korea, and they just had a pro-independence party candidate elected president, and yet we're just kind of sitting there with our thumbs up our asses. Oh, what do we do? It's like, well, we could, I don't know, maybe encourage them, encourage that party, encourage that movement to get stronger. And another thing that, unfortunately, laymen who end up voting for Donald Trump, China guy, and unfortunately, to some extent, Hillary Clinton, don't appreciate the fact that the global economy is so intertwined. No one owns anybody.
Yeah.
For all intents and purposes, globalization is socialistic. Because you maximize the profit for everybody, and then if something bad happens, you maximize the losses for everybody.
Yeah.
Carries both the burden and the benefit of the global economy and its.
And I think this article, it's sort of making me realize something I've always sort of found frustrating is this whole confusion of it's like confusing bluster for strength. That's a good way of putting it. Like Americans, not all Americans, but there's a lot of Americans who think, oh, we gotta talk big and we need to have the biggest military. And, we have to go around and take shit from no one. And it's like, but that's not strength. In the modern world, that isn't strength. That was strength in 1910. That isn't strength now. And I think people are confusing that. And that's sort of as much as I've always given Obama a hard time. I love that's sort of something I've always thought Obama understood. Is that he understood that strength wasn't bluster. Strength was shrewd diplomacy. It was saying the right thing at the right time. It's engaging with your, like, what he did with Iran was amazing. What he's done with Cuba is amazing. He's done more with Cuba than all the embargo did in 50 years. Like, Cuba's honestly talking about having private companies now. That's the brilliance of Obama, in a sense, as much as we were rough on him. I think, if anything, his strength was foreign policy, which I think most people would find hilarious, but that's because people confuse bluster with strength. Obama's got a military base on the Philippines again, and that would have never happened 10 years ago, but he said the right things.
Obama didn't threaten to destroy everything, therefore I don't like him.
Pretty much. Like, and people think, oh, our enemies are resurging. It's like, no, I don't. Okay, Russia's doing what they were doing when Bush was in power, but Russia was doing it in Georgia. And then before Georgia, they were fighting in Chechnya in the 90s. Russia's always invading some countries. Russia's like the U.S.
Honestly,
yeah.
The thing, and it's really, I like that you bring that up, because especially with Russia, it's not something that you can really, attribute to any one U.S. president or any one British prime minister or French president or anything, because it's the same dude. It's Putin. He's going to be doing what Putin does all the Putin live long day. He doesn't care whether Donald Trump, Barack Obama, or Vermin Supreme is president of the United States. He will invade. If he feels like it, he will invade Ethiopia. There will be no point to it. It will be a power trip. He will do it because he's Vladimir fucking Putin.
Pretty much.
It doesn't matter if the president he faces is spineless or has the biggest, loudest foreign policy rhetoric ever. He will do whatever he wants because he can. It's different with Iran because, like you said, Iran doesn't always have the same leader, and also because they're more willing to work together.
Yeah. And Iran actually, as much as it's something that we've said before, Iran, as much as we pretend Iran's a dictatorship, Iran actually has a democracy probably more functioning than half of Europe.
Pretty much.
So it's very important with Iran that you say the right thing, because if you can give the left of Iran the meat that it needs to say, yo, the US will work with us and we can get tangible results by talking with them, then they can get stuff done. And then you can actually get reform in Iran. But if you're constantly you're constantly waving your sword around at everyone who calls you the wrong name or says America with the wrong accent, then yeah, you'll have a much harder time getting the left in those countries to get the kind of reforms you pretend that you want to see there.
Mars bars America. Sorry, I just had to. So when we were studying the Iranian Revolution, there's a thing that people would be saying in the streets of Iran, and it was, I forget what exactly it was because I don't speak Farsi, but it was Farsi for "Death to America," and my class made fun of it because it sounded like they were saying "Mars bars America," but so it sounds something like that. But yeah, that's pretty spot on. I can't really add much to that, other than go Christian. And I think the biggest problem that we encounter when it comes to this is foreign policy when you're in office is one thing, because you can because when you're in office you can pretty much do whatever you want. As long as people go along. When it comes to foreign policy, you can pretty much make any proposal, any agreement, any sort of any sort of sit down talk you want. But when it comes to elections, unfortunately, when you're talking about foreign policy, you'll also have the layman of the United States weighing in too, especially with this election. And unfortunately, they don't understand the nuances of foreign policy that maybe you or I do. And that's not their fault. It's because they haven't been educated.
Ayatollahs of Iran. You never met America.
The iron toilets of Iran are what's making this country work. But you get what I'm saying. It's you can't. People don't know. A lot of people don't know this. Don't know what exactly is going on, so they just vote for whatever sounds better in their opinion, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Even if in the eyes of such scholarly people as us, it's the wrong choice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the terrifying thing is that I think that started out as the opinion of some people in the population, and it's grown to be the common knowledge, so to say, in U.S. government, because you see both parties, both are offering you choices of equally unnuanced foreign policy views. One of them just has to say them without the racism.
Well, I think that more has to do not only with appealing to, unfortunately, more simple-minded folk, but also it has to do with, you know, just the whole aspect of wanting what am I saying? The whole aspect of the military-industrial complex and wanting more military spending and more aggressive foreign policy, because that's what we do. That's how we make money, and that's how we pay the people who pay us in campaign donations.
Yeah. Well, I'll leave that that topic on a proper quote, a fitting quote. The last thing to go on an old boxer is their punching arm. And if you're waving your sword around as a country, I have the feeling you're down to your punching arm. It suggests you're down to your punching arm, and I think that's part of the reason China feels emboldened in a sense, because they see the U.S. as a country that's kind of, you know, it's what Americans think is strength, the world is perceiving as weakness.
Well, did you have anything? I forget. Did you have anything else you wanted to talk about?
I was going to briefly touch on the fact that Germany has recognized that the Armenian genocide happened.
That's pretty chill. I like that.
I just find it tragic that that's
news.
Yeah. And then I found it even more tragic Britain and the US still don't officially believe it happened.
That's because of Turkey. Literally everything. If you want to talk most foreign policy, just humanitarian blunders, you can blame it on our relationship with Turkey, unfortunately. And it's really unfortunate because I like Turkey as a country. It's not a bad country. It's just that their government is really, we're rah-rah, we're great, right-wing, you get the picture.
Yeah. Oh, well.
All right, well, thank you very much, Christian, for joining me on this inaugural Cubic Dimensions relaunch. I hope to be having more people. I hope to be having maybe some interviews, some bigger discussion, as well as talking other topics other than politics. Thank you very much for everybody who watched. Sorry it had to be this late. It will never be like this again, hopefully, because just a scheduling error at work. And yeah, I hope to see you guys next time, as well as my own YouTube channel, Matthew Kavitas. You know where to find me. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night. And as always, have malice toward none.